a blacklisted Bugatti, a YouTube channel built on automotive resurrection projects, and one of the most quietly powerful car manufacturers on Earth deciding it had seen enough. That combination doesn't just make for compelling content. It creates the kind of legal pressure that most people in the automotive world never see coming and are completely unprepared to handle when it finally arrives. What's unfolding between Bugatti and Matt Armstrong isn't really about a single rebuild. It's about who controls a vehicle after the money changes hands, whether manufacturers can reach across that transaction years later and dictate what happens next, and what it actually means to own something at the absolute top of the hypercar market. Matt Armstrong built his entire audience on salvage projects nobody else wanted to touch. Total losses, insurance write-offs, vehicles carrying histories that made dealerships refuse to open their gates. Those were his specialty, and the audience grew because the work was real and the outcomes were genuinely surprising. When he and FLXG took on a Bugatti that had been blacklisted by the manufacturer, the challenge wasn't purely mechanical. Bugatti refused to supply parts from the start. No approved technicians would get involved. No factory support of any kind was offered, because the factory's position was clear from the beginning. This rebuild wasn't going to happen with their cooperation, and that refusal was supposed to be the end of the story. But the rebuild continued anyway, and that's the moment when everything shifted into territory none of the parties involved had fully mapped out in advance. The videos went viral at a pace that changed the entire character of the project, and that's when Bugatti's position hardened into something more serious. What had started as a damaged hypercar story became a global case study, tracked by millions of people across YouTube and social media platforms, with every episode functioning as a live public argument against the idea that Bugatti holds permanent authority over its vehicles once they leave the factory floor. Every workaround discovered without factory backing, every panel refitted without approved components, every system brought back to life without a certified technician. Each of those moments registered as a direct challenge to a control structure Bugatti has built and defended for decades. Manufacturers operating at this tier don't let public challenges like that sit unanswered, especially when those challenges are being documented at scale and watched by a global automotive audience. Bugatti doesn't operate the way most companies in the automotive industry do. The brand isn't selling transportation. It's selling membership in a tightly controlled world where the product is exclusivity itself, and exclusivity depends entirely on the perception of absolute quality and uncontested manufacturer authority. Every Bugatti on the road, whether a Veyron or a Chiron, regardless of who currently holds the title, represents the company's reputation inside a market where perception carries the weight of currency. Approved service centers, certified technicians, factory-sanctioned repair histories, those aren't simply quality control measures. They're brand protection infrastructure, and that infrastructure operates whether any individual customer agrees with it or not. When a rebuild unfolds publicly outside that system, the manufacturer doesn't only face mechanical risk, they face a narrative risk. And at this level of the collectibles market, narrative risk gets treated with the same urgency as a product recall. The legal tools available to a company like Bugatti don't require a dramatic courtroom moment to cause serious and lasting damage. Brand protection law, trademark enforcement, intellectual property claims, arguments built around reputational harm to the brand. Those mechanisms exist precisely for situations like this, and they can be deployed with full effect without any court ever rendering a verdict. Even the suggestion of legal action carries enough weight to immediately freeze most operations, because the cost of defending against even an unfounded claim from a manufacturer of this size and reach is simply beyond what most individuals and small businesses can realistically absorb over the long term. The message being transmitted here isn't directed only at Matt Armstrong and FLXG. Every trader, every independent rebuilder, every insurer operating in the luxury segment, and every content creator who documents automotive projects for a living is receiving the same signal. Working outside the manufacturer's ecosystem carries consequences that extend far beyond mechanical complications, and those consequences don't hold off politely while legal proceedings work through the system. Reputational damage travels faster than any lawsuit in this space, and that speed is a core part of what makes the threat effective regardless of how the legal case ultimately develops. Sponsors quietly begin conversations about pausing relationships before anything is filed in court. Collaborators start reassessing their involvement the moment a high-profile dispute becomes public. Insurers flag accounts for review and start asking questions about exposure. Future clients begin requiring documentation and assurances that weren't part of any previous conversation. None of that requires a judicial ruling. It only requires visible association with a high-profile dispute involving a manufacturer that controls its brand image with exceptional discipline, and a dispute involving Bugatti qualifies as high-profile by any standard in the industry. For content creators who have built real businesses around documenting automotive projects on YouTube and across social media, that's an existential financial risk wrapped inside what presents itself as a mechanical challenge. And for traders who move ultra-luxury vehicles at the top end of the collectibles market, the implications reach well beyond one car and one channel. Liquidity in the hypercar segment operates according to rules that people outside it rarely understand until they find themselves needing to move a vehicle quickly. Cars at this price point don't sell under favorable conditions. They sell only when every element of their history, provenance, and manufacturer relationship is in order and verifiable. Their value depends on documented relationships with the factory, verified service records, and a form of perceived legitimacy that cannot be reconstructed once it's been publicly put into question. When a vehicle becomes the center of an active dispute involving the brand that built it, liquidity doesn't simply slow, it collapses entirely. Buyers operating at this level don't absorb that kind of uncertainty for any price reduction, and the realistic number of people willing to pay genuine hypercar money for a Bugatti with a contested history and an active legal cloud sits at effectively zero. For FLXG, that reality means walking away at any stage produces a complete financial loss, while staying in means remaining inside an escalating dispute with no clean exit available on either side. What Bugatti is actually protecting here extends well past the specific car being rebuilt on camera. The entire luxury automotive industry, and particularly the segment dealing in collectible hypercars, runs on precedent, and precedent established publicly in front of millions of viewers carries unusual weight across the whole market. If this rebuild succeeds without meaningful consequences following, the case for manufacturer authority over post-sale vehicles weakens permanently and visibly. Other damaged hypercars become viable candidates for similar independent projects. Other owners begin making major modification decisions without consulting the factory. Other rebuilders start documenting unauthorized work without seeking any form of approval. And other audiences begin treating that documentation as evidence that the manufacturer's control system is optional rather than binding. From Bugatti's perspective, that sequence of events justifies a significant and sustained legal and financial commitment to prevent it, because the long-term cost of letting control erode publicly at this scale is far higher than whatever it costs to stop it now. Ferrari, Lamborghini, McLaren, and Pagani are all watching how this situation develops, and that audience of competing manufacturers is itself a dynamic Bugatti is aware of as it decides how hard to push. Every brand operating at the top of the collectible automotive market shares identical concerns about unauthorized rebuilds, public documentation of independent modification work, and the growing audience that social media delivers to these projects. If the approach Bugatti is taking here proves effective at ending the rebuild or establishing a deterrent strong enough to discourage future projects, the same strategy becomes available to every other manufacturer facing similar challenges in their own segments. Rebuilding a high-value vehicle stops being seen purely as a financial risk calculation and becomes a legal exposure question from the start. Independent modification of ultra-luxury assets transforms into a liability decision that advisors weigh in on before any work begins. Public documentation of unauthorized work on cars at this price point becomes something legal counsel actively discourages, and the market restructures itself quietly, without any press release, simply through decisions not taken and projects that never get started. The uncomfortable reality sitting underneath everything playing out publicly here is that owning a car at the level of a Bugatti doesn't transfer the same unrestricted control that buying a standard vehicle does. Manufacturer influence doesn't end when the sale closes and the title changes hands. It follows the car through every subsequent ownership, shapes who will realistically perform service work on it, determines what documentation future buyers will accept as legitimate, and controls what any subsequent purchaser can realistically expect to pay for it on the open market. That influence often isn't captured in contracts or disclosed transparently at the point of sale. It exists as an unspoken structural reality that every serious participant in the upper tier of the automotive collectibles market understands implicitly, and it's exactly that unspoken structure that an independent rebuild documented and distributed on YouTube challenges in the most direct and visible way possible. Matt Armstrong keeps the project moving forward despite the pressure building around it. FLXG remains committed to a position where stopping carries as much financial cost as continuing, which means the dispute has no easy resolution available from their side either. Bugatti holds a stance that was never going to soften in response to audience sympathy or viral view counts, because brands operating at this tier make decisions based on control and long-term precedent rather than short-term public sentiment. And for everyone watching from outside, collectors, traders, insurers, independent builders, content creators, or people who simply follow this world through screens, what's happening here is a real-time demonstration of how narrow the gap between ownership and permission actually becomes when you're holding something a manufacturer still treats as an extension of its own identity and reputation in the market. The rebuild isn't just a rebuild. The legal pressure isn't just legal pressure. And the lesson embedded in both of them is one the hypercar market will be working through long after this particular car is either finished or quietly set aside.